Welcome back to the Caucus Room. I'm your chairman, Don Calloway, and today we have an extraordinary guest, one of my great friends and dear brothers with us. Let me give you a little bit of his resume. Lawyer, veteran of the United States War in Afghanistan, having risen to the rank of captain. State representative in the state of Missouri. Youngest statewide elected official in the country, having been elected Secretary of State in Missouri. Federal candidate running for the United States Senate in 2016, and a groundbreaking candidacy that was. Briefly flirted with running for President of the United States, a nonprofit CEO, a remarkable humanitarian, executive, husband, father, and one of my great friends on the planet. Please welcome to the Caucus Room my dear brother, the great Jason Kander. Sir.
Okay. That was fantastic. I'm so excited.
Welcome, man. We're excited to have you here. Actually, last episode or a few episodes back, we had Omarosa and I said we've officially integrated the caucus. But now we have officially integrated the caucus. So, man, this is historic. This is a wonderful day.
I'm just breaking barriers here, Don.
As you've always done, in a lifetime of public service.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, but
I'm sure you'll handle it well, man. Well, as you know, as we do at the top of every show, we start with a toast with our Black-owned spirit of the caucus. In the last 30 days or so, Uncle Nearest has become one of the venerated unicorns in American business, having reached a valuation of $1 billion. So shout out to our great friend Fawn Weaver and her family, the owners of Uncle Nearest in the great state of Tennessee. So we're going to pop this bottle of Uncle Nearest and toast to your ongoing success. There we go.
Oh, good noise. You gotta keep that in.
All right. We're going neat today, JK. And I know you don't drink. This is, actually our toasts are becoming a bit odd because third or fourth episode now where the guest doesn't drink, and so it's all me.
This show is just people watching Don drink.
Hey, man, it is what it is. Well, listen, man, I'm extraordinarily proud of you and all of the things you've done, which we hope to talk about a little bit today. So cheers to your ongoing success, my brother.
And to yours.
Thank you, sir. So you and I meet in 2007, 2008, in the midst of the Obama zeitgeist. And I'm a young, serviceable lawyer politician from the St. Louis side.
No, you were the guy we were all hearing about from the St. Louis side.
And you're the guy we're hearing about from KC. And then we got our brother in the middle, Stephen Weber in Columbia. And then we went to the State House. We were elected state rep. But you started long before that.
Yeah.
Heartland Democratic Club. What was that? Break it down. I don't think people know about that.
Yeah. Thank goodness. Because, what a climber, man.
Yeah.
I was my wife Diana and I were in law school out here at Georgetown, and we were just like itching to get into the game. And I, being at that point all of 23, 20, whatever, I was pretty sure I knew everything. And I knew exactly what the Democrats were doing wrong, obviously. Because when you're 23, that's kind of the first thing you figure out.
That's right.
Is what all the grown-ups are doing wrong.
That's right. And how you know how to do it better.
And how I knew how to do it better. And so it became this thing of like, we're not going to seed values because this was the family values era, the compassionate conservatism and all that business.
The W. Bush era, leave no child behind, all that jazz.
Right.
Yep.
And it was like, why are we letting the other side talk about values as if we don't have them? So it was interesting. I joke about it and pan it a little bit now, but when I look back, it's actually kind of how I talked about Democratic politics all along, which is to say our attitude in forming that was we should be as liberal as we want to be, but not act as if we don't have values. So it was just, let's frame what the values of the Democratic Party were. It was basically, the idea was to push the brand. But look, let's be honest. Also, I was itching to get in the game. Yeah. And at that point, really the only thing I knew about professional life is what I learned in the Army. And what I had learned in the Army was there are certain warrior tasks and drills, things that you have to learn, the basic fundamental parts of being a soldier. And I just kind of took that and applied it. So I knew there was this thing I wanted to do, but I also figured, well, this is a pretty good way to figure out how to raise money and how to campaign if I go work with other candidates. And so that's what it was.
And that was the fundamental purpose of the club. You were raising money and supporting other candidates just in the region, in the KC region, right?
Yeah, but in classic Jason Kander, irrational sense of self-confidence style. It was actually, the actual title was Heartland Democrats of America.
There it is.
It was just the Kansas City area.
The ambition has been there from day one.
Yeah, I mean, if you look not that closely at all, you can see the clues. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah.
That's hilarious, man. And so I didn't know until we got to Jeff City that you had kind of created this organizing mechanism that long predated anything that we were doing there. And then we ran for state rep. You're kind of like the young gun, the rock star in the House Democratic Caucus. And we were all ambitious, right? You, me, Weber, Hummel, all, the young cats that we came in with. But you very clearly from day one had a specific intentionality and plan behind your ambition that I don't think the rest of us quite understood.
I was pathological.
Fair enough.
Yeah, looking back on it, I was very driven, and I did have I had Diana to help me. I had my wife to help me with all of it, and it's a separate part of the conversation I'm sure we'll get to. But to put a pin in it, the other thing I had was a very strong desire to escape what was going on in my mind because of PTSD left over from my service.
Welcome back to the Caucus Room. Today we're excited to introduce you to a game changer for political junkies, prediction enthusiasts, and stat heads. It's called Predicted, and it's an online marketplace where you can make real-time predictions on political news, election outcomes, or even policy events. Think of it like the stock market, but for politics. Will a certain candidate win their primary? Or what's going to be the margin of victory for either party in the Electoral College? With Predicted, you can trade shares based on your predictions. And when you get it right, you make money. It's simple. You buy shares in predictions you believe will come true. The more confident you are, the more you can invest. If your prediction is correct, then you earn money based upon its market performance. If you're wrong, well, you take that L and it's back to the drawing board. But either way, it's a fun and engaging way to deal with real-time political outcomes and global news. Here's the best part. You don't have to stay invested in any particular market until the event happens. When you make what you want to make, you can cash out. So whether you're a seasoned political strategist or just someone who likes following elections, Predicted makes staying informed exciting and profitable. That's predicted.org, promo code Caucus Room. Sign up today and start making predictions on elections that pay. Thanks for tuning into the Caucus Room. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Instagram, and let us know in the comments what political bets you're making.
So the other thing, looking back, that's going on at that time is, I had intrusive thoughts. I had PTSD and I didn't know it. And so while all of us were all very ambitious, I was the one who, my ambition was driving every moment because it allowed me to not be present in in difficult thoughts. So setting that aside for a minute, yes. I was quite methodical about it.
You were doing some things even when we were 27, 28 that I was always awed by. Obviously now knowing a little bit more about kind of where it came from, but you were still really good at the job in a way that was far and above how good any of us were at that job at the time. One of the things that you used to always do is, I lived in St. Louis, you were popping up there. Or Weber was in Columbia, you were popping up there, and you were from KC.
Y'all keep a lot of votes in both of those places.
A lot of votes. And again, we were all ambitious. All of us wanted to be statewide.
Yeah.
But you used to call it making the state smaller. What was that in your mind?
So here's how my theory worked. Okay. When you're a state representative, you're lucky if, I don't know, pick a small percentage of the people who you represent have any idea who you are.
That's right.
And if they do, it's because they've seen your yard signs, right? Or you knocked on their door, right? If especially if you're in a big town like Kansas City or St. Louis, it ain't because they've read about you that often in the paper, right? Because it was hard for us to get coverage.
Can't break through like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, then I had to think about, well, the people who make a statewide campaign happen are mostly at the early stage, they're donors, right? They're funders. And what I think the mistake that a lot of people in the state house were making that I saw was they got in there and all of a sudden there were all these institutional donors, right? I mean, the people who they were seeing every day.
Yep.
And they were supporting them. They were giving them money for their reelection.
You're talking to lobbyists.
The PACs, whatever.
Yeah, the industry people.
And I was looking at it going, okay, I get it. Like, no matter what I do, just by showing up to work, those checks are going to show up. But if I run for something else, those checks aren't going to show up, right? So I've got to get to know other people.
Yeah.
And on top of that, then you also, at the time, you know, we had this thing that don't really exist that much in Missouri anymore statewide, which were called Democratic primaries, which were a relic. But that meant you also had to get to know not just the donors, you had to get to know the, what we would think of now as like the influencers, but the activists and everything. So I was like, okay, let's put these two groups together. And going off the theory that most people aren't even sure who their state rep is, probably most of these people who care about a potential statewide candidate, they know who their state rep is, and they probably have enough room in that catalog upstairs to know about like one other member of the legislature. So my thinking was, I would like to be that member of the legislature for all these people.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And making the state small was like, I don't need to get name recognition for real. I need to get 90% name recognition among 0.01% of the population. And because I felt like if I can do that, that's the launching pad to then you have the network and the funds to actually put together a statewide campaign. But the thing is like, I feel like at every stage of me running for office, I was doing it probably a few years before I was really ready.
Oh, you were.
You know,
and that's part of
every office.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember I had a 6-month-old, right? And I was trying to get home to St. Louis to go hustle some traffic.
That would be the other
tickets.
advantage I had. True was born when we were 32. That would be probably number one thing I had going was, I
didn't have kids.
Didn't have anybody I needed to tuck in.
And you, this is a bit out of sequence here, but from day one in the game, you had Diana, who has been there at every single stage. And we're always going to give Diana her flowers. I was going to get to that at the end. But I think it's a critical part of the story here. I mean, she was always with you as a full-on partner in this from the beginning.
When I ran for state representative, I knocked on 20,000 doors. She was standing next to me for 8,000 of them.
Wow.
At least. And then for the other 12,000, she was plotting out which doors to go to. And then, I mean, I could go through the list of everything she was doing in all these campaigns. But yes, not only was she right there, but she was frequently the best strategic and creative mind I had access to.
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I remember you putting together these kind of plans, and you were very good at making it clear that you were ambitious, but not saying specifically what you were trying to do. Did you always know it was going to be Secretary of State? How did you figure out and target which statewide race was yours and that you could bite off and actually win?
Yeah, it's a great question. I knew a couple of things. I knew that I was feeling stagnant in the State House because,
we were in the lower chamber.
In the minority.
In the minority of the lower chamber.
Right.
I think we might have felt a little different if we came in the game in the Senate, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
And it was like, there's only so many things you could do.
Yeah.
Within the first term, I felt like I hadn't done much, but I had done all the things I could do from that position.
Right.
And on top of that, going back to sort of the mental health thing, part of the post-traumatic stress, and I can now look back and say an element of it was this urgency of like, don't stand still for too long, which finds its root in when you're in Afghanistan and you're doing the work I did, don't stay in one place for too long. Yeah, literally, right. Yeah. So, and now I can look back and see that was part of it. So all of that created a real sense of urgency. In fact, I remember at one point there was a vacancy for county prosecutor in Jackson County.
I remember that.
And I put my name in, and I got to the last round or whatever, which I had never even handled a criminal case. But I was 29 years old. Right. Not only had not prosecuted one, I had never had a client accused of a crime.
Right.
But I made it pretty far in the process, and I didn't get chosen to fill the vacancy. And then I heard Robin Carnahan was maybe not going to run for re-election as Secretary of State, so I started talking to people about it. I did, to my credit, feel it was a very important position. Yeah. This was before that was a cool job, but I knew like in Missouri it's very powerful, and election, issues. There was voter suppression, and I knew that was a thing. So I did care about it. I also was in a hurry to not be in the state house and to be elected statewide. I was just a young man in a hurry. And I remember it was right after the prosecutor thing didn't work out, and the governor, Jay Nixon, was at an event. I was there, and he's talking to me about something really important. I don't remember what it was. It was very important to him. And I was like, do you think Robin's going to run for re-election? And he's like, get in the game, man. And I was like, sorry, right. Yeah. So I was in a hurry. And, Secretary of State became an opportunity. At that point, I think there was like an age issue that I couldn't run for lieutenant governor or something like that. So it was like, boom.
But Secretary of State was viable and was possible because you had spent that time making the state smaller. Right?
Absolutely. Without that, there's no way. There were a lot of people in the Democratic Party, who were like, yeah, I know him. Yeah, he sat in my office. I wasn't sure why.
Yeah, that's right.
But he was here, and we talk a lot.
But another thing that you have always been extraordinarily good at is raising money. And one of the more difficult aspects of being in the game at all, regardless of how you feel philosophically about money and politics, is that money is a reality of politics. And it is very difficult to sit in that room and make call time to people that you don't know. You're trying to make small talk with people who they know why you're calling, you know why you're calling, and it is the most BS tap dance.
Yeah.
And it was gut-wrenching to me.
Yeah.
I couldn't bring myself to do it. But from day one, you were very good at raising political money.
Thank you. I was very good at it for the same reason that I was very good at running for the state legislature, which I was very good at for the same reason that I was a decent soldier, which is the Army taught me an enhanced, if I have a power, I have an enhanced ability to endure suffering. and I think what the Army taught me is how to sometimes trick myself into believing that suffering is two things. One, quasi-enjoyable, but two, virtuous. That I came to, and I don't have this as much anymore by any stretch, and not even close. I came to feel better about myself when I was putting myself through that kind of thing. It made me feel like I was of virtue. So sitting in a room for 8 hours and calling people, it was terrible, but what was good about it made me feel valuable because you could see numbers on a whiteboard move. Yeah. And it was like I could pull this little satisfaction out of that. Yeah. And you and I have this in common. We both really like people.
For sure.
And draw energy from them. And so which means the worst part of call time for me was getting voicemails and tangling with gatekeepers on the phone. But when I got a person on the phone, even if they didn't say yes, and even if we didn't get support out of them, man, I just enjoyed talking to people. And interestingly, what I think made it hardest for me over time was not calling people. At first, it was calling people I didn't know, right? Like, it's not a natural thing to do. Right. Call people you don't know and ask them for $5,000. Right. Like, it's not natural. But after a while, that was the easy part because now you've called these people for so many years, they are actually your friends. Yeah. And you're calling them for more money. That became the hardest. Because it's so like unnatural. It's so awkward. It's, hey, would you like me to continue to do my job? Like what other job does somebody do that? No accountant is like calling people and being like, would you like me to continue to be an accountant? I'm going to need you to send money for which I can provide no service. Right. So that was hard.
And naturally you reach a place where, this is one of my personal pet peeves, like these are your friends, but you're occupied with the job and your family. And so you eventually end up reaching out just to ask for money. Yes. And that is, I find that so cringeworthy. Both having to have to make the calls and being the recipient of that call.
Or when you, on a rare occasion that you call them and it's not about that, you have to leave in their voicemail a message that says, I'm not calling for money,
Yeah.
so that they'll call you back.
Yeah.
And you're not even mad at them.
Yeah.
You just understand, like, or like you'll send a text ahead of time, hey, I'm going to call. It's not a fundraising call,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And they pick up that one like on the first ring,
Yeah.
you know?
They're excited to talk to you.
Yes,
Yeah.
and which is nice. Okay, so since part of the theme here is takeaways that people who are looking at running for office or being in the game can use, I have this thing that when candidates call me and they want advice on fundraising or whatever, the first thing I do is I'm like, look, I haven't run for office in several years. Most of my advice is dated. Don't ask for my advice to be nice. Like, and then once we get past that, I say, here's one thing I can tell you, and that is my little riff here on the idea that a fundraising call is a 3-act play. This is how I would get through this. A fundraising call is a 3-act play. Act 1 is, if you already know them, if they're a friend of yours, you begin it, we're friends. I'm calling and we are friends, and we're going to talk about our friendship. We're going to talk about, I'm going to catch up with your kids, whatever. Now, to make it less awkward, I might begin with, look, this is a fundraising call. We'll get to that in a minute. Right? Just put it out there. If you don't know them, you got it. The objective of the opening of that conversation is you have to get into a conversation. So I think a lot of candidates make a mistake where they have like a script that a manager's given them. They're smart enough not to read it word for word, but they're sticking to the script. I'm so-and-so, I'm running for this, and, you know, and these people are professional donors,
That's
right? They get called, I mean, you get phone calls on here.
Every day.
I mean, it's on Do Not Disturb right now, because otherwise you'd be getting them.
Yes.
And
from some dude who I've never met, who's running
in
something in Michigan,
Pennsylvania 75 or whatever. Right. I don't think they got that many, but you know. And so you've heard it all. So chances are, if you picked up, it was an accident.
Yes.
So what I got to do is I got to get you in a conversation first thing. So the very first thing that happens is I'm going to ask you an open-ended question that it would be awkward to not respond to. It could be, as sometimes I would start when I didn't have anything better to go with, I would start with, I'm Jason Kander, I'm from Missouri. You ever even been to Missouri? You know, because if there's a national call. If I know where they are, I'm like, what is the weather in Annapolis like right now? Just something like that, inane. But then if I can see something on their bio that I find interesting, I'm going to be like, hey, I'm a space nerd. Tell me about you working at NASA. We'll get to the fundraising stuff in a minute. We'll get to the candidacy. So anyway, whatever it is, get them in a conversation.
Yep.
So if you already know them, get them in a conversation about your prior relationship. If you don't, get them in a conversation, ideally about them. That's Act 1. It takes 2 or 3 minutes. Act 2, you got to make the ask.
Yeah.
What I tell candidates is the mistake they make is they think that the way they're going to get them to give money is they're going to tell them all the things they believe in.
Yep.
Everybody calling and believes in all that stuff.
I'm a dim donor.
Exactly. Yeah. And if I'm calling you and you're not from my state, chances are all you care about is this a seat where we can probably take something from Republicans, or is this a seat where we need to hold it? And most importantly, can you win?
Is it winnable? Yep.
That's all that you're a commodity.
Yep.
Recognize that. All the other stuff, make them like you, but recognize if you can't pass the good commodity test, it don't matter.
Right.
So keep that short. Here's who I am. Here's why this matters. Here's how I'm going to win. They don't need to know how terrible your opponent is and what awful thing they said. They think they're all awful, right? Don't need to put that in. Get through that part as quick as you can. Finish it, make the ask, do that. Stay on the ask, but once the ask is over, whether they've said yes, whether they said no, whether you've negotiated about how much they're going to give, whatever it is, do not do what most candidates do, because now we're in Act 3. What I tell them is don't say, okay, well, so-and-so is going to get on the line and take your credit card. No, that's going to come in a minute. First, either remind them that you're friends because you are friends and that's why you called, or continue the conversation from the beginning so that you can be friends by the end. So then it's like, hey, we'll get the credit card in a minute. I really appreciate it. Something else I wanted to ask you about. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be.
But come up with anything.
Come up with anything, but it's got to be genuine. It's got to be real. It's got to be something that interests you. If it's
I don't just get the money and leave. I mean,
right.
I've got to,
And now consultants, they'll say, don't do this because they're like volume. But the thing is, you're going to, keeping your butt in that chair requires you to have human interactions and human experiences. And, it's sales. They got to be able to hear your smile. If you're not enjoying it and talking to real people like a real person, you won't be able to do that. Yeah. So I always say, if you want to raise money, it's a 3-act play. Act 1, get them in a conversation. Act 2, make the ask. Act 3, be a person.
You eventually win this statewide office as the youngest statewide in the country. But I'm sitting here thinking about those times and the dramatically different era. Was that 2010?
When I won the
Secretary of State, 2012.
Yeah.
2012. The dramatically different time between then and now is that not only in Missouri, but across the Southeast, Democrats could win statewide office. And I think about all of the talent that's lost to the misfortune of being born at this time in history in the South, right? It's remarkable that you were able to hit at a time where it was possible, right? And I don't know. Do you think about like what? I don't even want to talk about like what happened in our home state, but do you ever consider like, gosh, that happened quick, man? Like we lost it quick, you know?
That escalated quickly.
Yeah, that escalated.
You know, you nailed it. Like, because most people, especially who are from where we're from, refer to it as the Midwest, and it is. But in this context, you refer to it as the South and the Southeast.
That's right.
And that's right, because the short version in my mind of what happened is we joined the Southeastern Conference and not just in college sports.
That's right.
That's right. Because it used to, when we were growing up,
that's right.
Missouri and Iowa were like
Big Eight, man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it was like politically we were like Iowa, and Iowa was like Minnesota, and now it's like we're a little more like Arkansas, and so that's what I think happened. And there's other stuff we get into, the demographic shifts and all that, but that's not why people are watching this. So when I think about it, the way I think about it is, when I meet people who are in the State House now, I have two thoughts. One is, how are they doing that?
Yeah.
Because, you know, we would win occasionally.
Oh, yeah.
You know, amendments, bills, every once in a while, like, and we had hope most of the time. They don't have that. So I'm like, how do they do it? And then I feel pretty grateful to them, because I'm like, that is so much more thankless than when we were doing it.
No, we were not in the super minority. As a matter of fact, there were moments where we knew the moderate Republican, we knew the issue, we knew the couple of two or three that we could pick off to make things really, really close. And I remember going into the fall of 2010. I mean, when we got there, we were governing ourselves as though, like, this is what we're going to do when we're in the majority. Like,
absolutely.
It can happen.
That's what we believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But that all went by quickly. You win statewide office, and you have a staff when you're in the state legislature, but now you actually have a staff. You run the election authority, you run business registrations, you are the Secretary of State. And I think one thing that we don't talk about is politicians actually as the CEO of this department of the state government.
Right.
You were a whole lot of people's actual boss.
Yeah, 250 people.
250 staffers that worked for you. So what was it like during that moment to be in charge of people's salaries and payrolls and benefits? And you are the employer at that point, but also a politician. But what was it like to have people's careers as a responsibility of yours?
Interestingly for me, and this is probably pretty unique to, you know, I was 31 years old and I was a state. So usually a person in that position would be like, wow, now this person's in charge of all these people. But for me, my professional base of experience had been the Army, and I had been an Army officer. So like really and I'd gone to law school and practiced law, but really the thing I knew about in the professional world was leadership. It's the thing I had the most training in. So
that's fascinating. So it was not entirely
that part was not intimidating to me. Like I actually loved that part. I would do things like every day I would start my day with I would hand deliver birthday cards to whoever's birthday it was, because it would give me an opportunity to go sit at somebody's desk and talk to them in a way where I knew that they didn't feel like, wait a minute, why is my boss's boss coming down to talk? Like it didn't put them on edge or make them, so I got to like, really get to know people that way. So I had tricks like that I had learned like through leading people. But what jumped out at me about all of it was, and over time, what it really jumped out was when I looked around, and I'm not talking about all politicians, but disproportionately, it does seem like politicians make for pretty terrible bosses more often than they do in the non-politician world.
Do you know Dear White Staffers? There's a whole thing here in D.C. about that now, right? Like, and there's an interesting moment that we're facing. Really, globally, but specifically on Capitol Hill in D.C., where folks are mostly anonymously, but folks have found voice and platform to speak up and speak out about really, really bad bosses and abusive bosses, right? So you're a politician, but you're somebody's boss. You are somebody's administrative leader. Aside from hand delivering birthday cards, how are you just a decent human to the people in your employ as a politician?
I think it comes from mindset, because I've thought about this a lot. Like, because for the longest time, I just couldn't understand why it seemed like so many other politicians were, because we would get so many people who were really talented who would come to work with us in that office or in other campaigns, and they had come from like pretty august places, but they were coming because they didn't like the environment. And so I've thought about it a lot, and I think it comes from a mindset. And the mindset too often is that people who are doing these jobs, that they should be so grateful to have had the opportunity to do the jobs. And that never made sense to me. And I'm not trying to, because I'm so wonderful. I think for a lot of reasons, partially because of the military, partially because, you know, I had some issues about like with PTSD, like how I regarded myself anyway. I had this sense of like, I was so full of not just gratitude toward people who came to work for me, but I didn't understand it. Like, because I'm like, I mean, think about it. We know, just for all the talk that we've had so far about how unglamorous the State House is and running for statewide office is, staffing someone doing that is 10 times less glamorous and so difficult and done in such anonymity. And I would look at it and just be like, I can't believe, because no one ever stood up in front of a crowd and said nice things about them. They always, everything they did, it was always, I was the one who kept getting the credit. And so I was so overwhelmed with gratitude to those folks. I just felt like I owed them so much that I would, you know, I had that Army thing that was taught to me where like, it killed me to not be the last one in the office, you know, and like I was probably overworked because of that. And so that's what I've never understood about politicians being bad bosses, because I was always like, do you understand how much better these people's lives could be if they weren't? And also, by the way, on a campaign, my God, on a campaign, if you are successful in the campaign, the only person guaranteed a job is you. And all these people are dedicating all this time
to you and your ambitions.
If you lose, you're going to be the one most likely to get a new opportunity.
That's right.
They're not.
That's right.
And so I think, to the extent that I was a good boss, and I think I mostly was, I think it's because I just felt so indebted to everybody who, and it also helped that we were pretty much the same age. So it would, you know, so it would be
that's interesting.
Awkward and strange to treat them like they worked for me.
So the theory then would be that the younger politician has a certain empathy, because staffers are...
That's the theory.
In theory.
But who knows?
But the staffers are younger. They are earlier career professionals. They don't make much money whatsoever. Not all of them, but you should have some empathy towards these people who are very literally your employees. Right? Because of that commonality.
There are things I look back on and I'm like, oh, I could have done that better. Like, for instance, I was fresh out of the military, so I had this idea that it was really important that people be clean shaven if they didn't have beards. Like, if you didn't have a beard, you'd be clean. And I look back and like, that's so ridiculous.
Steinbrenner? You had a Steinbrenner rule?
Yeah, which, as you know, now looking back,
what are you doing?
Repulses
I couldn't work
me.
for you, man.
No, if you have, I was like, look, if you have a beard, you have a beard. If you don't have a beard, you got to shave, which is ridiculous. All right, like now, like I shave twice a week because my wife asked me to, so I feel completely ridiculous about it. Stuff like that. A lot of that I think had to do with one, coming out of the military. The other thing was I was super young, and I was constantly trying to show that, like, no, I do belong here.
Yeah, there was a certain like respectability that we were all.
So it was like wearing a tie every day, and now like, oh man, I don't do that now.
But you started as Secretary of State. You were able to achieve a certain limelight, being so young and you know, mildly dynamic, right? But no, you were developing, and I was watching. But you started making the country smaller at some point. What was that like?
That was at first really fun. So it started with, on the Senate campaign, the way I described it was...
Wait.
Yeah.
So, yes. So this leads
set it
into running for the United States Senate in 2016 at the end of your first term of Secretary of State. How did you know that the Senate seat... Well, obviously, you know Roy Blunt's term, his term is coming up.
Yeah.
How did you know that out of a universe of viable Democrats, you were the guy?
Oh, well, you'd have to ask my parents. They just gifted me with this irrational self-confidence that, other than being able to endure suffering, is my other... If I have talents, it's these two things that don't count as talents. But I wasn't planning to do that. And actually, I joke, but like, I saw that as my first term statewide. I'm not going to run for the U.S. Senate against a guy who's been in office since before I was born. Like, it didn't make sense. But then our friend Abe, who was my chief of staff and campaign manager, conspired with our buddy Stephen Weber, the aforementioned, and they got a poll together, and the poll showed that it was possible that I could win. And then, of course, it was like, well, now I'm going to do it, And so that's how that came about. And then as far as like, I remember at one point during that, another statewide asked me, they said, okay, what's it like actually like running for, because that race was, a lot of people thought that was going to determine the majority. So it was a very watched race. Now at the beginning, nobody thought I had a chance, but once we made it competitive, all of a sudden everybody was watching. And so somebody asked me, what's that like? And I said, when you're in school and you imagine what running for office is going to be, like you think it's the West Wing, and it turns out it's like Parks and Rec.
Yeah, that's right. That's so perfect. Oh, man.
Right?
Yes,
or telemarketing or whatever.
Yeah.
And I said...
There's no glamour.
No, right.
Yeah.
And I said, when you're running for a competitive U.S. Senate seat, that's when there's finally like once a week, 5 minutes where you're like, oh, this is a little West Wingish, Because that's when you start meeting pretty famous people because they want to help you raise money, and you're flying around the country, and you're certainly meeting the most politically famous people. But you're also meeting like actual famous people. So that kind of stuff. And so that part was fun. But I also remember moments where, again, my mental health is starting to get worse and worse because I have now gone, at this point, 8 years without tending to what was undiagnosed PTSD. I can remember moments like getting off planes in places where I couldn't remember where I was, right? I'm getting off a plane, and I can remember this thought like ringing through my head, which was, what the fuck am I doing?
Yeah.
Like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And because at that point, my son was 3 years old, and he barely knew me. And so that's what that was like.
Yeah. And I'm very much tapped in at this point, and I'm watching in 2016. It was a totally different world than what we thought was the momentous task of running statewide, right, for Secretary of State. That federal glare, right? Even if you had not been an extraordinarily popular candidate, that federal glare is just so much different, right? Because of the national import and really global import of who's in the United States Senate. How were you able to adapt to... Obviously, Missouri is important. Whoever's lieutenant governor of Missouri is important. But the light gets a lot hotter.
Yeah. Right? What I learned in that was you end up having to run two campaigns at once. The campaign that is pretty much is very similar to the statewide campaign that I'd run before is you got to convince people in your state to vote for you. Now, it's amped up because people are actually like going to the polls. Not all people, but many more people are going to the polls thinking about the U.S. Senate race. When you're running for Secretary of State, you're trying to move that needle as much as you can, but it's limited, right? Because not that many people are going to go thinking about that race.
Right.
Especially before everybody understood what that office... I mean, back when people thought that the Secretary of State of Missouri was in charge of keeping peace with Iowa, before we knew about voter suppression, like it wasn't driving people to the polls as much. But there was that campaign, trying to get people in your state to vote for you. But then the other campaign was, and that was just as important, honestly, sadly, was getting people all over the country, Democrats who can fund campaigns and everything, and Democrats who write about campaigns, to believe you could win. And which is why the stump speech that I was giving at fundraisers all over the country began with, yes, we can win in Missouri. I mean, I mean, I became like a professor of Missouri political science all over
Yeah.
the country. That's what people wanted to know about.
Yeah.
So you had to explain all that. And so it's 2 campaigns. So like I would come out here to DC occasionally because you're going everywhere, you know, nationally. It's crazy, right? Like anytime you have to go somewhere, you're scared to death that someone's going to see you in another state.
And so now there's what is that? What does the practical life look like? Now there's trackers involved.
Yeah.
Now everything you're doing is tweeted or texted to somebody. What does that national glare feel like?
Well, the thing is, I mean, that national glare is there. You barely get to feel it because you're either on a fundraising call, or you're at a fundraiser, or you're asleep, or you're on a plane. Those are the activities until you get to the last 2 months of the campaign. You get to really campaign, but even then, it only dials that stuff back a little bit. So you're aware of it, but the glare is more about the irritation of things like when you come to DC and you'd sit down with somebody and they would regurgitate to you the last thing they read in Politico about your race or about your state. And not mention the article, just pass it off as conventional wisdom.
Too, come on.
And it's like, that was like, I remember at one point some dude wrote an article about the curse of secretaries of state running for Senate because there had been like 2. And they had lost around the country. And so
now it's this.
I had to spend 2 months responding to the idea that, as if that even like makes any sense. Like, well, like voters are going out there and being like, look, if he were attorney general, it'd be different. But I mean, like they don't know or care. And so that's the frustrating thing is like, and then also in that race, you're working so hard as a Democrat in Missouri to make independents and Republicans in Missouri feel like, yeah, he's a Democrat, but I can vote for him. And that's, for me, that was never about policy. It was never, you know, I didn't do things to like, well, look, I'm not the same as Nancy Pelosi. I didn't do that.
Right.
But it's why I couldn't go to the Democratic convention. It's why I couldn't go on MSNBC and all that stuff. Because then you're a national Democrat. You're not their Democrat.
That's right.
And, you know, at one point we had an ad that went viral in that race. And all of a sudden, I was invited to go on every show I'd ever watched. And me back then would have loved to have done that, but couldn't do it. So it was like you're aware of the national glare and you have to be too cool for the national glare. It kind of doesn't make sense.
So I wanted to talk about, and I don't want to spend too much time because I think you've talked about this 1,000 times, the gun ad.
Sure.
Where did the gun ad come from? The gun ad, people are given to hyperbole. It's the greatest ad ever, all that type of stuff.
Oh, no, it is.
I'm just kidding. Might have been, though. The gun ad was...
Ads, like, do ads even exist now? I don't even know.
I don't know. And that's the thing. That's the crazy thing. 8 years later, I don't know that it pops in the same way it does because everyone is so oversaturated with content. But the gun ad was a legit moment in time. Where did it come from? And did you expect it to do what it did?
So Air LaPierre, as we didn't call him at the time, but he, you know, Wayne LaPierre, the head of the NRA, was flying all over Missouri, you know, talking smack about me. And legit, like I had an F rating from the NRA that I had earned and was...
We were very proud of.
And all that. But it was a problem politically to have him running around saying all that. And they were airing all these ads about me and stuff. And I remember saying to Mark Putnam, who was our media guy, well, I bet I can put a rifle together a lot faster than the other guy. And he was like, oh, you think you could do it blindfolded? And I was like, probably. Now, I'd never done it blindfolded, but I had cleaned it in the dark an awful lot, right? So I was like, yeah, I probably could. So that's where the idea came from. And the reason I think that the ad blew up is because it was like a muscular ad, a muscular argument for gun safety, right? It was like, that's the first reason. But I think the other reason is because the voters that the NRA is trying to persuade, I think that if they're persuadable, like as in they could be gettable by me, I don't think they really buy the idea that I want to take their guns. I think that the ads that they were running against me are meant to make those people say, that guy is not like me. And that guy probably wouldn't like me or my friends. And so when we made an ad where I'm putting the rifle together blindfolded and I'm talking about why I'm for background checks, it was like the ad was like, look, this is what I believe. I know what the hell I'm talking about. And also, like, you and I would get along. You know, like if I showed up at a block party on your street, we would mix it up and it'd be fine.
Yeah.
And so it's cultural cues.
How did you know the ad was a thing? Like you dropped the ad.
It was
What
scary.
happened next?
I'll be honest. It was scary because I knew that people in Missouri were going to get it.
Mhm.
I knew that Democrats, Republicans, Independents, that they were going to get it. But I didn't know if that very Missouri ad was going to translate outside the country. So like when we dropped it, I knew it was a thing when we were shooting it. And I looked up, I got it on the first take. We took a lot of takes, but I got it on the first take. And
One take to me?
Yeah.
I like it.
And I looked up and I saw the crew.
Yeah.
And you've done ads, like the crew's there. They're just, they're at work.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I could see the looks on their faces. I was like,
Wow.
oh, something's here. And then when every member of the crew wanted a picture
Yeah.
at the table with me and the rifle,
Yeah.
I was like,
yeah.
ooh, there's something here. So
Wow.
I knew it was going to be something. But what we were worried about was I didn't know how the people who agreed with me about guns, the pro-gun control people outside of Missouri, would interpret the ad, right? It was like,
break that down.
it was like me putting a rifle together.
Mhm.
It's not me taking a rifle apart.
Yeah.
It's me putting a rifle together. It's
arming yourself.
It's me as a Democrat showing you I know how to handle this weapon.
Yep.
And I was concerned that people would misread it as glorifying the weapon, when in reality what it was is demonstrating expertise and therefore backing up the opinion. So when I think it was Americans for Responsible Solutions, which became Giffords, which I'm now on the board of, issued the very first reaction. It was a press release, and they put the ad out themselves.
Yeah.
And I remember breathing a real sigh of relief because it was like, oh, people get it.
I remember the ad popping off and immediately reverting to my political self, which was, damn, how much money did he raise off of this?
A lot.
Really?
That's the biggest thing the ad did for us. So the story of that campaign, in retrospect, has become Kander made that race so close because of that ad.
Yeah.
The truth was that ad came out, I think we started airing it in like September, like late September maybe. And we had just pulled even in the polls already.
Mm-hmm.
But we needed money.
Yeah. Yeah.
What that ad did, I mean, look, to put it plainly, that ad made me famous.
Yeah.
Is what it did, right?
Wow.
I mean, it took me from a guy running in Missouri who people who really followed politics closely were like, no, you should watch this race, to the guy from the gun ad.
Yeah.
That's what it did. Like, I get introduced so often as the guy from the, even now.
Yeah.
And with that came, Joe Scarborough, they couldn't get me to come on TV because I wanted to nationalize the race, but they were playing the ad every day. Washington Post called it, ad of the year. Everybody saw it everywhere.
Yeah.
And that made it where people who were like, I don't know if he can win, were like, nationally, were like, I don't know if he can win, but this is cool.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to max out.
Yeah.
And that gave us the money to finish it.
Bro, you're like a legit screen addict.
Bro, I'm not even scrolling this time. I'm actually on Predicted. How sure are you that Kamala is going to win this election?
I mean, anything can happen, but I'm pretty confident that she's going to go to the White House.
Well, on Predicted, I could make 42% right now if I bet on her, and I use the promo code for Caucus Room, so I got a bonus on my first deposit.
42% is pretty good money. And you don't think Biden resigns, right?
There's no way he's resigning.
I don't think he's going to resign either. So according to Predicted, I can grab 13% out of that market right now if he doesn't resign before the end of the term.
Sounds like a strong bet to me.
And with the bonus code, it's house money.
Or Caucus Room money. So head on over to predicted.org using promo code Caucus Room. There's money to be made this election season.
Hey, look, I'm about to get in on this electoral college margin right now. Looks like you can make up to 79%. Why not?
Can't beat that.
So you ultimately didn't win that race. I was there that night
yeah.
in Kansas City, and I remember I was with my man Calvin Harris and just driving home devastated. I remember leaving the theater. What was the theater?
We were at the Uptown.
Yes, the
in
Uptown
Kansas City,
Theater. And I just remember feeling so like gut punched.
Well, because
and
also
deflated.
Trump had just been elected president.
Well, that's the thing. I remember just being so effed up.
Yeah.
And Calvin and I made the terrible decision to drive back to St. Louis from Kansas City that night
She stayed up having to
And
deal
it was
with
like
all
a
that.
fucking funeral, man.
Oh, God,
But the
yeah.
crazy thing I remember is looking at him when they announced Trump wins, and it's the pitch black in mid-Missouri, and they said Donald Trump is officially, and he and I looked at each other and just looked straight into the
Yeah.
I-70 abyss.
God.
But the most remarkable thing about that night is, and I still don't know to this day where that came from, the staff, the campaign, your family, the crowd, you were like the least upset. And we were all devastated. But you were like keeping everybody else kind of up and okay.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, if you fashion yourself like a leader of things, like you can, you know, it's like, I remember, I try not to make every analogy about the Army, but there's somewhere I don't have another analogy at my fingertips. Like I have a pretty profound fear of heights. Like I'm 5'11", which I'm saying out loud because people are going to see the other footage where I'm standing next to you. I need people to know you're really tall. I'm 5'11". I don't even like being this tall. That's how I feel about heights.
Wow.
You know what I mean? I'm not joking, but I can remember like in training when we would have to get on a helicopter, like and like, you know, with the door open and stuff. I didn't like that. But when we would do that training mission and I was in charge, I was the platoon leader, I didn't feel it. So that's the, like, you know, the pilot doesn't feel turbulence the way the rest of the people in the plane do. You know what I mean? And so because I fashioned myself in that role, I was able to compartmentalize, put that away. And also because at that point, PTS had worn on me long enough that I had a certain amount of emotional numbness. So there's all that. But the other thing is in the weeks that followed, as you know, like, what I didn't expect to happen. Like, I thought it was over. Back then, you didn't get a second act, right?
That's right.
It was Howard Dean. Like, you exited. You were over.
Left. Yeah.
And this is pre-Beto. It's pre-me, you know, really. Pre-Stacy. Pre, like, you don't win, but people say, this person has value. Let's hold them up. So I didn't think that was an option. So then in the weeks that followed, when people started calling me and being like, hey, we'd like you to be involved in this. We're you know, and like people like David Axelrod and folks like that were calling me. It was a little, you know, what I always compare it to is it's like nuclear annihilation has happened. Yeah. And you're devastated about that. Yeah. And you emerge from the bunker and you take some small solace in the fact that the other dozen or so survivors look at you and go, we think maybe you're in charge? And you're like, oh, well, I'm in charge. Yeah. That's what it was like.
But so that, you know, I'm going to say this in the most loving way possible.
Please.
I blame you. I have two friends that I blame for one of the phenomena about modern day politics that I hate the most. I blame you and I blame Bakari Sellers for this notion that you will advance.
Bakari is more to blame than me. He's much more of a star.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you know, I think it's equal, but you know, we can give him 51 to your 49. This notion that a way to professional success in politics is by losing. Yeah. Because what you ultimately get is people who run for high-profile office to lose and fail forward. And I think it's important that we start with the Heartland Democratic Club and the war and all of that stuff I saw you do, right? Yeah, yeah. And Sellers is younger than you and I. And I saw him do this stuff at 21, coming out of Morehouse, running for state rep. Yep. And because all of us generationally in politics are peers, I saw y'all put the work in a way that I see candidates run for office now. And frankly, some of them, I ain't gonna say no names, knowing they cannot win. Yes. Hoping to end up on CNN, hoping to end up running a important, well-funded nonprofit. And I'm like, yo, that's not how this works, right? And frankly, that's not why you should run. I just wanted to get that out. You don't got to respond. No, I'll respond to it. But I want to tell you I blame you.
It's fair. I am partially to blame.
Yes. Thank you for shouldering the responsibility.
The result of what I did, not because look, you're right. Like, it doesn't mean don't run. It means don't run to be a celebrity. Yes. Don't run. Yes. Don't run to advance yourself. Right. Like, one thing I can say for all of the stuff, I look back at my career and I'm able to say, okay, maybe I was doing this or this because I was driven by something inside that I needed to deal with. You know, I can look at that stuff. One thing I can say is I never ran a race that I didn't think I could win.
Right.
You know, like that Senate race, we lost, but we outperformed.
No, but we were supposed to win. I mean, I was. Yes, I.
Comey let her happen.
That's right.
We're not trying to revisit it, but we lost by 2.8 on a day that Trump won our state by more than he won Mississippi.
That's right.
Right. So, you know, but that said, like, I think to your point, the problem is what people see is that there's a terrible, you know, that really not very good Keanu Reeves, Gene Hackman movie. The Replacements.
You called it terrible. That's okay. You can say terrible.
It's a wonderful movie, but it's a wonderful, terrible movie. You know what I mean?
Awesomely
it's not
bad.
a terrible movie, but it's one of those bad movies that's like, I know this isn't very good, but like, I'm going to watch it.
Awesomely bad, for sure.
Yeah, awesomely bad. It's formulaic is what it
that's
is.
Right. That's right.
But it's a comforting formula. Anyway, there's a scene where Gene Hackman, when he's basically playing the coach from Hoosiers, you know, and he says, you know, you're like a duck on a pond. It's all calm on the surface, but there's all sorts of stuff going on underneath. That's people don't see the underneath the surface stuff.
Yeah.
So what they saw was, like, because I get people call me and they're just coming out of the military or whatever, or sometimes it's a thinner string. Like they're like, well, you know, I'm Jewish, you know, so like whatever. They see my story reflected in their own, and they're like, so I'm going to run for this super high office, and I'm always like, okay. I'm the last person in the world to say, pay your dues. I'm never going to say that.
Gatekeeper.
Because people said that to us. And so I don't do that. But I always do say, keep in mind, I didn't start there.
That's right.
Right? Like, I was making the state small. I was doing those things. And also I was learning the soft skills. Like, pitches come pretty fast at a certain level.
That's right.
And you got to see them come in for a while first. So, yes, I do think it has caused... It's not altogether bad because people got to move the conversation forward, but you can tell the difference.
You can tell the difference. And I think that also you and I had the fortune or misfortune of getting into the game and really experiencing the industry at the time when politics became a legitimate path to celebrity, right?
Yeah.
In a way that it was not.
Not when we started.
Not when we started.
Yeah.
Like, I remember... Obviously, I only served one term in the State House. So our first term...
But it was an awesome term.
It was a dynamic... It was the best first term. It was the best first term.
It was. I enjoyed every second of watching your first term.
You know, but in that first
in all
term,
seriousness, you were very good at it.
Thank you, man. But I remember Kit Bond coming to the State House to announce his retirement.
Yeah.
And you and I are sitting next to each other just in awe of this guy who we've seen since we were two coming into our workplace to tell us that he was quitting.
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember 2 years later, Kit Bond is asking me to hire him as a lobbyist when I'm at Budweiser.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, whoa, this is crazy, right? Because we've idolized this dude, and then you eventually took on his successor. I don't exactly remember my point, but I think that the point was that is the transition from politicians being career public servant. Kit Bond is in the game our entire lives, to now people are running to replace him to be one of this group of 100 national celebrities, right? In a way that I don't think that existed.
Right.
And maybe that's social media, maybe that's a 24-hour media cycle, but we stepped into the game at the point where it became a different beast.
We came into the game roughly, I'd say 7 years before politics fully merged with popular culture.
Whew.
Because
because
when we were growing up, now we really sound old. When we were growing up, they were two separate things.
That's right. They were.
Okay? When you watched a movie, you did not think about what it meant politically.
You did not.
When you watched a music video, because that used to be a thing, you did not think about that. You didn't. Now it's all one thing, and that was beginning already. Started with Sarah Palin and all that stuff, but it was accelerated with Trump because Trump came from popular culture.
You know, honestly, I think that's why it's important that we come in 2008, and I think you and I come in. I'm a skinny black lawyer with a law professor wife and no facial hair, right? And because I'm tracking what he's doing, right? And you are doing something similar and parallel on the other side of the state.
Back at speeches I gave back then, I'm like, I'm doing Obama.
Yeah, you got the thumb on top of his. Yes.
I'm like, oh my God, I don't even think I knew it.
Yeah. Well, I don't even think. I mean, as much as he was our guy, and as much as we idolized him, I think it starts. It's before Trump. I think it starts with him. And honestly,
remember they had that ad where they said he's a celebrity.
Yeah, yes, and it was a disparaging thing.
Yeah.
The problem with Trump is that you get bad Trump imitations, but you also got a lot of bad Barack imitators.
Yeah. They just don't.
You and I were good, but in a
we're
post, yeah. But I definitely trace the advent of merging politics and celebrity very much in that 2008 kind of Obama zeitgeist.
And it was always ripe for happening, right? Because the
atmosphere was waiting on a him, right?
And like people in our line of work, there's a certain hunger for that, right? Like when I remember after the Senate race and before I was like looking at running for president, and I was like, I had this 6, 8, 12-month period where I was just kind of politically famous. I didn't really know what that meant, and I remember like, oh, what are the trappings of this? And one of the first things I did is I direct messaged all the baseball writers that followed me, because that's what those are the people I wanted to be friends with.
Baseball guy. Yes, that's what we were into.
And so now like, who do I text with all the time? John Morosi, Jeff Passan. Still, those people became my friends.
Little name drop.
Yeah,
okay.
Name drops that nobody watching this cares about. So I know you do. But most people are like, who's that?
Yeah.
So I feel comfortable dropping those names.
Thank you.
But I'm saying we all do that to some degree. And so there was a hunger among politicians for that, right? And then everybody like in Hollywood thought they should be a part of. I mean, everybody part of everything looks at politics and goes, well, that's not hard.
That's right.
I can do that.
Right. That's right.
And so it was naturally heading that direction. And then when Trump came down the escalator, it was like these worlds are now.
It blew it wide open. Yeah, it blew it wide open. So let's talk about that brief moment where I don't think people know. You kind of have admitted to it and alluded to it on Twitter and other spaces. There was a moment post 2016 where you and I ran for president.
That's right.
I was all in.
Yeah. You were.
We made a preliminary exploratory trip to South Carolina and shook all the hands and hit all the spots and touched all the bases.
You're my South Carolina rabbi. You were showing me around.
We had a good time.
Because I'd already done New Hampshire like 12 times, Iowa like 12 times.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, you legit were running for president. We talked about our dear mutual friend, Mayor Tashara Jones. Me, you, her, your whole crew went up. You took the band to New Hampshire and we talked. You gave a speech to the New Hampshire Democratic Club, right? I've never been to New Hampshire before or since, right? And you and I made the rounds in South Carolina. Talk about that brief moment where, and obviously we know why you got out and then eventually transitioned out of the game altogether. But talk about what it felt like for that brief moment in time to be running for president.
So at first it was like really exciting, obviously, right? Because you're running for president. You can't legally say it, but everybody knows you are. That was really exciting. What was interesting about it was I was 37.
Wow.
And what was...
Dude, irrational confidence for real. Like, this is not a joke.
Let's call it what it is, Don. White man confidence.
Well, but I was in, though. We were all in.
Yeah, we were all in.
To that point.
Me personally, irrational confidence gifted to me by my parents. Who are white? Like, I'm saying, like, they are. You can't get around that. It's like...
They're good whites. But
I'd like to think so. But I'm just saying, like, it's worth stating, like, male, adding male. Like if you change a couple of elements of that story, it becomes a little more far-fetched like, in my own personal mind. It would have been right. But I just
was put a pin in that. There was something to it because I remember by that time.
I'm just saying there are certain parts unearned by me. That's all I'm
fair, and that's very self-aware of you to recognize. But I will tell you that by that time, I think those of us in Team JK, we had long since stopped betting against Jason Kander.
Sure, yeah. Okay.
And so we thought this was remotely possible at 37 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, okay. Putting aside like the humility stuff for a second and just being like, you know, I was very good at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I had great people who were also very good at it. And I think still a gift for it, right? For all the things we've talked about, but also I had just spent like a year on the road perfecting like my speaking to all different audience sizes. So anyway, what it was like at the beginning, you're thinking it's going to be one thing, and then you realize the best training you've had for the early stage of running for president is knocking on doors in Kansas City.
Yeah. Because
you're in Iowa and New Hampshire, and you're in coffee shops, and you're trying to win people over 3 at a time. And I realized, like, had I never run for the state legislature, I don't think I'd have been as good at that.
Yeah.
You know? So there was that, and then it was like, okay, let's take it to the next level. Let's go to South Carolina, which is a story that we should tell real quick, because I remember.
I do not remember this, by the way. I've smoked a lot of weed between now and then.
This is one of my favorite Don things, but also it's more of a Don and Jason thing that, as we have discussed many times over the years, you spent many years trying to get me to dress better. But also I held in such regard your fashion sense that it meant a lot to me to like occasionally impress you, which I used to do very occasionally. So anyway, we're going to make this trip down to South Carolina. And I think I was already out here in DC for something.
Yes.
And so we were flying out of DC, out of National, I think. And we get there, and I had this proclivity for wearing fun socks because it's really the only part of my personality I was allowed to show as a candidate that age. So I would wear crazy socks. And we're getting ready to get on the plane, and I sit like this, and you can see my socks, and you go, oh, come on. And then you go, I knew this would happen. And you reach into your bag, and you pull out a brand new pair of regular, just like black or gray socks that you had clearly bought like the day before, and you handed it to me, and you were like, I knew that, here, put these on. So you had brought socks knowing that the socks I was going to wear would not work.
With some bullshit, yes.
And I was like, no, these are great socks. And you explained to me, you're like, we're going to visit black people in South Carolina.
We are.
And you were just like, you can't wear those socks. Like, no one's going to take you seriously.
Yeah, the quirky sock thing, I think
it's a white thing.
Well, it's not.
It had run its course. It was a white politician thing.
Fair, yes. Yeah. And it had run its course by then. And I was just like, let's go, honor these people.
It was hilarious.
On their native land.
I remember laughing. Yeah, I remember laughing so hard and knowing you were right.
Yes.
So I changed my socks.
I was right. And we saw Travis Robertson, the chairman of the party, and we saw the great Antoine Seawright, who took the rounds.
We were down there, Jamie Harrison. We did a radio show with him and Antoine, as I recall.
That's right, man. Yeah. That's right. And that's those, I mean, it was only a moment, but there were those.
We saw Bakari down there.
Saw Sellers. Yeah. There were those real kind of organic things. Sitting in that radio hall with that torn up carpet and like Don, I forgot Don's last name, but the OG host. Don, the host, man, that was like a real moment. But then shortly thereafter, you moved briefly to the KC mayoral race, and then you took a step back, and you've talked about, we've kind of built up to it over the course of this discussion. You took a step back, and I think that the world is better off for you having taken a step back, but more importantly for you having talked about why you took a step back. And you've talked about that in 50 different places. But just briefly, what was that, and years on now, how do you feel reflecting back on getting out of that?
Well, it started with the first step back was really running for mayor. It was me going like, something's not right. Inside, something's not right. And so then I came up with the wrong solution, which was, I'm going to make a difference in my hometown, progress I can see. I'm going to go be mayor, and that's going to fill me up and make me feel better, which is because I just wasn't admitting to myself, no, you got post-traumatic stress, dude. You got to go get help. So we started running for mayor. It was the first race I'd ever been in that I was, like, from the beginning, expected to win, and it should have been a blast. But instead, it just wasn't. And it was
How long were you actually in that?
99 days. I can tell you exactly.
Was it that long? I didn't think it was that long.
Yeah.
Wow.
99 days. And it should have been a lot of fun. But it was the least fun I'd ever had campaigning. He was the least fun I'd ever had, period. Suicidal thoughts were getting stronger. So finally, make the decision to go get help, pull out of public life, after making a call to the Veterans Crisis Line.
Yeah.
And and it's the best decision I ever made. It saved my life.
Yeah. Now, skipping around a little bit.
Yeah.
There are two people outside of your parents who I love. There are two people who have kind of been constant ever since I've known you. We talked about the great DK, Diana Kander. You mentioned earlier Abe. There's a bit of a non sequitur here, but Abe Rakoff, the amazing Abe Rakoff, has been there from day one. Talk about who Abe is, but more importantly, for people who want to play this game at a high level, talk about the importance of having that critical one person, or maybe it might be more than one for some folks, but that person. Talk about the importance of an Abe in somebody's life.
Great point. Abe Rakoff was he managed the campaign for Secretary of State, then was Chief of Staff and Deputy Secretary of State in the Secretary of State's office, then became campaign manager in the Senate race, and then managed all the other stuff. The presidential, we created Let America Vote together, all that. So Abe had come to Missouri initially because he had worked on Stephen Weber's campaign for State House. He had been Stephen Weber's brother's roommate at Northwestern. And then Abe had worked as a communications person in the Secretary of State's office. And Stephen had said to me, this is a guy we got to keep in Missouri. He's brilliant. And so Diana and I went to Abe's apartment in like 2010. And we just talked about what would a statewide race look like in your opinion? Now, you and I were young for the game. Abe was 5 years younger than us.
He was child.
It never made any sense that Abe knew everything he knew. So I remember we left his apartment that night, and Diana said, when you run for statewide office, that kid has got to run the campaign. And her theory, she used to say that Abe was like Buddha, because we could never figure out what life experience or reference point Abe drew from to know how to do everything. She said he just must go sit under a tree until he figures it out.
Divine things. You know, it's funny. I remember thinking, I'm North St. Louis, and me and Chris Carter got all the swag, and we're like, what's this young ass white dude know about anything? Man, ain't nobody fucking with Abe. Abe was different, man.
Best political operative in the country, in my opinion.
That's right.
And also happened to be somebody who quickly became one of my best friends. And so I guess the way to get to the takeaway from what you're talking about is, it's really important, if you're going to be in politics at any kind of high level, that you have somebody who their loyalty is, and I wouldn't even say to you, that their loyalty is to what the two of you are doing together before it is to anything else.
To the mission.
Now, if they suck at their job, then it doesn't matter how, they got to be good. All right? But either way, so, okay, by way of example, when we decided we were going to run for the Senate, we kind of went out to D.C. and got ourselves recruited, right? Like we went out, took the meetings, and people were skeptical at first, and then they were like, "Okay, we think you're the guy."
The whole DSCC thing,
sit down with Schumer and hear his speech that he gives about his dad, knocking around, all that stuff. Which anybody who's ever been recruited to the U.S. Senate will get that reference, and I don't know if other people will, but Schumer's, I'm sure, told that story to many people. So anyway. I remember Abe, because he always seemed to be able to predict everything, said to me at the beginning, as soon as we were like, okay, we're going to run, Abe was like, look, just so you understand, at some point, the DSCC is going to say, you can't have that guy as your campaign manager anymore. Right? And
that's important. At some point, the institutions of politics and the institutions of partisan politics replace your people with theirs. Right? Across the board.
And therefore replace their judgment. They remove your judgment and insert theirs. About how you should run, what you should say,
that kind
of thing. And I remember saying to Abe, well, that's not going to happen.
That is a critically important point.
Yes.
Man, that nobody knows. At some point, you become a creature of the institution.
Yes. if you give in to the idea that the people who have already achieved the thing you're trying to achieve know more about how to achieve what you're trying to achieve.
In your state.
Yes, if you give in to the idea. Chuck Schumer is a brilliant dude, okay, who I like a lot and think very highly of. To this day, I will tell you that I know better how to run for office in Missouri than Chuck Schumer.
That's right.
And furthermore, that Abe knows better how to run for office in Missouri than Chuck Schumer. By the end of that campaign, the point of the story is Chuck Schumer would tell you that Abe knew better. But at the beginning of that campaign, he surely wouldn't have. And the difference is that when Abe said, at some point, they're going to make you take a DS person that they give you, I said, I'm not going to do that because A, I know you're the best person for it. But B, and this is another piece of advice I give candidates when they talk to me about running for these kinds of offices, B, I want someone whose loyalty is to what I and they are trying to do together and not to the fact that the person who is telling them to do the opposite of what I'm telling them to do is the person who's going to give them their next job, win or lose.
Yes.
So if you take nothing against people who do this work around the country, but if I were to have replaced Abe with somebody that the DSCC gave to me, then I would have somebody who was there with me, assuming they don't want a job in a Senate office, who was there with me until the next campaign.
That's right.
Who's going to give them the next campaign? Not me.
But I would ask, and you always reminded me, man, I remember, I don't mean to embarrass you. When I went, I was running Pine Street early days, and I went and virtually embedded in, left Budweiser and embedded with Deshaunte Parks in Cherokee Street in St. Louis, right? And I was like, yo, JK,
on my
man.
campaign.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For the Senate race.
Yeah.
Of
No,
course.
you were there. You came
Time
home
of
and
my
did the work. Yeah.
Time of my life, man. And I remember texting you and being like, hey, man, we need toilet paper in this bitch. You were like, because I was thinking, I'm coming back, it's going to be this glamorous Senate race office. And yo, it was a closet and with the cement floors. I was like, hey, JK, man, we need some toilet paper, right?
Did I do anything about it?
And you were like, yeah, that's on me. I am the boss of this enterprise,
Okay,
right?
good. I'm glad.
How did you have all of that to ask? How did you have the moral courage, particularly as a young man, right? And the indignation to say, no, Chuck Schumer, I'm going to do this my way with the guy I trust, right? Because that's not an easy decision to make. Chuck Schumer, you walk around D.C. and he's in this fancy office and these are important people, right?
Yeah. Two ways. One that had nothing to do with my judgment. It was just a matter of I'd seen how smart he was.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been Secretary of State without Abe.
Yeah.
There's no chance.
That's
I mean, we won that race we won that race at 1 a.m. I mean, by like 40,000 votes out of millions cast. And that was Abe. Abe got that done. So one, I knew he was the right guy regardless. And then the other reason is, I guess, just that, I'm not going to say just loyalty because that was an important race. I wouldn't have stuck with somebody who couldn't do the job out of loyalty. But I guess loyalty to what we believed in. From the beginning of that race, Abe and I had a theory of the case, right? And the theory of the case was, if, given that in 08 or in 12, Obama had lost by 10, but we had won the Secretary of State's race on the same day. So it was like, okay, if we can keep the presidential race loss to within this, and then we focus on this message that we have, that's our win scenario. And we weren't going to come off of our win scenario, and we believed in it. So it was just like a loyalty to what we believed in from the beginning and understanding our state, I guess.
That Chuck Schumer did not know.
Yeah.
Right? Had not seen those numbers for 10 years in Missouri. Yeah.
I mean, there were times when, I remember...
and I'm not shitting on Chuck Schumer.
No.
The institution.
Love
right?
Chuck Schumer.
Yeah.
I don't think I can tell him how to win a race in New York.
Yeah.
Or most other states.
Yeah.
But I knew, how to win it there. Or Abe did, anyway. I also think, another thing that people may not realize is, going back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago about how there's a groupthink about how things work, and people accept a conventional wisdom of how things work. At that time, what everybody thought was the way you win in a place like Missouri is you act like a Republican.
Yes.
Now, the thing was, a lot of people in Missouri didn't necessarily think that.
That's right.
But that's the caricature of a place like Missouri that Democrats from the coast had.
That's right.
So I was, without naming names, getting a lot of pressure from very liberal people to not be so liberal in the race, consultants and that kind of thing. And Abe and I had this different idea about it, which is I'm going to run as me, not just because I want to run as me, but because we felt like, there are more Missourians who disagree with our politics than agree with our politics, and we're probably not going to fool them. But a certain percentage of those people will say, I don't agree with that guy, but he seems to care about people like me. And so that was what we believed in, and that's what we stuck with.
Something we do in the caucus room, and you've played it at every level, state, federal, and local, is a game called Who's Got Next. Now, this is an extraordinarily special iteration of Who's Got Next because I happen to know a particularly special story about once upon a time, 44, our Lord and Savior Barack Obama was asked this question, and he said, I didn't say, I'm not making this up, y'all can Google it up. He said, you got next, right? He said that you were one of the young politicians that gives him faith for the future of not only democratic politics, but American democracy.
It was very nice of him.
It was very nice of him, but he said that shit.
It was helpful in my career,
How did that come about?
Well, for me, it was, he said it on Pod Save America. It was his last interview he did in the Oval Office. And I remember I texted John Lovett and was like, hey, wow, you got Obama. That's a big deal. And he goes, I think you should listen to the interview. I think you'll enjoy it. And I didn't think anything of it. And I listened. I was like, oh, wow. I don't think my answer to this question will have the same effect on these people's careers that this did on mine.
Fair enough. But Obama begat my brother Jason Kander. Jason Kander says, who got next?
A few people that at this point that like are in that sphere of like active politicians where it's not just like, oh, they're good at it. Like, I think at this point it takes a lot for people like you and me to be like, oh, they inspire me. Like, I get excited about them.
It's hard to get impressed.
Yeah, because like we've just seen so much of the behind the scenes and all that business, and we've been through it. Wes Moore is a guy that I've gotten to know a bit, and like, man, I just really like him, and I think he
fellow
Army guy, and just the right approach to things, and I think he's one where, you know, we talked earlier about how, you know, if people go straight to the running for governor or whatever, it's so if he's one where, no, that was right. And he had done things. It didn't matter whether he'd run for something.
That's right.
And I just feel like he's got the maturity. He's in the right place in life. I like Wes a lot. Look, I still look at Stacey Abrams and say that's one of the smartest people I've ever known in my life.
You were very, very early. My friend Jessica Bird, perhaps was the only person I know before you. But you were very early Stacey Abrams believer.
Yeah, 2012 or 13, we were in a program together at the Aspen Institute, and we got to be very close friends to the point where when her first time running for governor, I was the one who introduced her to the crowd at her kickoff. Like, we're very close, and so I've seen her do her thing, but I've seen, you know, behind the scenes and like seen the way her brain works, and you've absolutely, whether it's running for office or whatever, like, she will continue to shape the future of the country. And I will continue to be somebody who, like, Stacey calls, I'm coming running.
But that's interesting because you acknowledge that there is a way to be in the universe of folks who shape this thing.
Yeah.
Without putting your name on the ballot.
John Ossoff and Ralph Warnock are not senators without Stacey Abrams.
Yeah.
I mean, which means we don't control the U.S. Senate if not for
That's
her.
right.
Which, you know, you go through the whole thing.
A black dude and a Jewish dude.
Right. Look, a few years ago, would you look at it on paper and go, you know, what we need to win Georgia is a Jewish documentarian and a black preacher?
Yeah.
Like, no. Yeah. But what Stacey did, and they're both great candidates.
There's no dispute, and this should go without. And listen, I'm a skeptic of political celebrity, right? We talked about this.
Yeah.
And so Stacey is a celebrity and so on and so forth. But Stacey is a celebrity only after, again, people didn't see the Heartland Democratic Club. People didn't see the New Georgia Project.
Right.
She built, right? She recognized changing demographics in the state of Georgia. She organized electorally around that for years before anybody knew her name. And she would have done that work whether or not she was ever the gubernatorial nominee, right? She put together that coalition, that sauce, man. That was her.
Yep.
Right? And it resulted in, it's interesting, man. Like the ultimate sacrifice is for progress that may not have your face on it.
Exactly.
Right?
They wanted her to run
Yeah.
for the U.S. Senate in 2020.
Yeah.
And she said no, but she prepared the battlefield for those guys, and they won. That day in 2018, when she was about to go out and announce her race for governor, I was backstage with her, and she was sort of with her like kitchen cabinet, like her biggest donors and supporters. And one of them asked the obvious question people thought at the time, which is, how are you going to get Trump voters to vote for you? And Stacey, being just one of the most brilliant people I've ever met, and tied only with you for my friends who can turn a phrase, said to these folks, she said, I'm not trying to get Catholics to become Baptists. I'm trying to get Baptists to go to church. And her point, of course, was, I'm not going to win over Trump voters. I'm going to get our people to show up.
Yeah.
So, Stacey, and then...
But there's an understanding that there's enough Baptists out there that if they
right,
show up...
exactly.
Yeah.
Which Stacey understood very early.
Yeah.
And then I'll give two more, both Marines, actually. One, our good friend Stephen Weber, who aspires right now to be in the state Senate in Missouri. And I think it's really what he's aspired to his whole life, and he'll be amazing at it. But after he does that, whether Stephen knows it or not, he has enormous promise to, offer the country. And he's just one of the best people you and I know.
So I'll say about Stephen Weber, we've known Steve a long time.
Yeah.
Eminently qualified to do whatever he wants to do. And were he born 30 years earlier, would have already been the governor, right? And a presidential candidate. The thing about Stephen Weber is that Steve stayed with me for a couple days in D.C. 10 years ago when I first moved out here. Could have been in D.C.
Yes.
Could have been in New York. Could have been in Chicago.
Could have been in Kansas City or
Could
St.
have
Louis.
been in Kansas City or St. Louis practicing law.
Right.
And chose to, as we say in the old country, keep his hands on the gospel plow, right? In a universe, we talked about this a moment ago, in a universe where Democrats have conceded that there is no space for us in the statewide politics of our home country. Steve said, no, I think I have something to contribute, and I think there is a space for people who want to hear from folks like me who happen to wear a Democratic label. And if we concede those territories, right, there legitimately is no future. Stephen Weber and people like, I'm sure there's a Stephen Weber in every state, but Stephen Weber has continued to push the ball forward when cosmopolitan motherfuckers like me have been like, I'm out, right?
Well, Stephen is a guy who made a choice that even I haven't made, which is he decided that he would rather fight the good fight and lose than fight a decent fight and win.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
that's right.
For a minute, he went to California to work for AFSCME and was like, well, we're winning. He's like, but this is not who I want to fight for. I'm going to go home and I may lose, but I may, not lose the race, but lose fighting, for working people, but he's never stopped doing it.
Man, I'll tell you, when we talked about it earlier, a few years ago, when you took Team JK to New Hampshire.
Stephen was there, yeah.
I roomed with Stephen.
Yeah.
Saving money.
Yeah.
Two in a room.
Sure, yeah.
But we've been roommates before.
Yeah, all three of us, yeah.
That's right. Me, you, and Stephen shared a floor.
Yeah.
But me and Stephen roomed in New Hampshire together. And that dude, man, I fell asleep while he was talking about the electoral possibilities for Democrats in the state of Missouri.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about, I have long since conceded and said, it cannot happen.
Yeah.
I live in D.C. I'm a fancy lobbyist. Stephen, take your ass to sleep. And he's talking about votes he can get out of Rawls County.
That's right.
And he's talking about votes he can get out of Pango, Missouri. And I'm like, dude, if you don't stop. But he's like, I know the math. I see the path. Man, God bless Stephen Weber.
He's probably in Rawls County today.
Yeah, like he's doing this for
traveling the
real.
state all the
Yes. He is with the Rawls County Mule Skinners.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. They're in Boone County, but yeah.
That's right. And then
the last one is Ruben Gallego. in Arizona, who's a good friend.
Arizona.
And a good friend, and I mean, just he doesn't take any shit off of anybody.
No, he does not.
He and Steven for sure have that in common, and like, man, he's just going to be an awesome senator.
Ruben Gallego, open Senate seat,
Mm-hmm.
in a purplish state.
Yeah, I would say, yeah.
There's a real opportunity for the Dem to win, and has something that you have, which is an incredibly supportive partner, right? Which I think is critical to success in this game.
Yeah,
you know?
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and Ruben also, for anybody who ever is going to go to Phoenix and hang out, Ruben knows all the good places to go, man. I've had some good times in Phoenix with Ruben, so. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, thank you for telling us who got next, man.
All right.
Yes, sir.
And you, because I'm going wherever you tell me all the time.
NAACP Best Negro Podcast.
Just twice you do it to me this time.
Man, I watch your Twitter, and one of the recurring themes is people asking you, when are you going to come back and run for office? And folks wanting to get you back in the game and get you back into elected office. But if I consider, from when I first heard about you as an Army officer, through all the things that happened in between to now, there's a very clear through line of public service. And one of the things that I try to think about, and I've consulted with you in our private moments over the years, is, there are many ways to lead, and there are many ways to serve, and almost none of them have anything to do with putting your name on a ballot, right?
Yeah, it's the exception when it does.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you've been serving continuously now in your post-political life through the Veterans Community Project. So tell me about the Veterans Community Project, but more importantly, tell me about how VCP and other stuff you're doing is giving you that high, giving you the opportunity to continue a life of public service without contemplating public office.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because people who know me, they understand that I'm engaged all the time in this stuff. And then people who know of me or know me through social media or whatever, it's like I'm a politician to them. When am I going to get back to being a politician? And the thing is, for me, it's like a Veterans Community. I'm the president of National Expansion, as you know, at Veterans Community Project.
What's VCP?
Veterans Community Project is a nonprofit organization that is veterans serving other veterans with the strength of the community behind us, building villages of tiny houses for homeless veterans and also serving at-risk veterans. Basically, we fight veterans homelessness and we fight veteran suicide. And it's the best civilian job I've ever had. It's also the longest running civilian job I've ever had at this point. I'm coming up on 5 years.
Wow.
Which for me is a long time in a civilian job. And look, I mean, I get to build something and see, I get to see the progress that I make, which is a huge perk. But also, I don't have any doubt about whether I'm making a difference, right? When we run, it's like you go all this way to try and win an election for the opportunity to maybe. And I'm not talking down on running for office. And the fact that people are constantly asking me, and Diana asked me yesterday, she's like, how many times a week do people ask you if you're going to run again? And I was like, 4 or 5 at least. And she's like, yeah, because 4 or 5 times a week people ask me if you're going to run again.
You're going to run, yeah.
And I try and keep in mind that I spent a decade of my life just really wanting people to ask me to run for things, So I try and remember that and appreciate it. But there's a lot of people watching this who either have worked on the Hill or aspire to work on the Hill, and so they may get this. When you're at the cafeteria in the House, and they have that one line that says "staff only."
Yeah.
And you notice how because the other line is supposed to be for lobbyists and tourists, right? The cafeteria can be empty. There can be 2 completely unused cash registers that don't say staff only, and you'll have a line 15 people deep in the line that says staff, because those folks don't want anybody around to think that they don't work there. You know?
Yeah.
And like, that's a perfect metaphor to me for what I used to do, what we used to do, which is to conflate the official authority, the office, the title, with meaning.
Yes.
And when I realize now, I look back and it's like, it didn't give me meaning. It gave order to my life. It made it where I woke up every day thinking, I know I'm working toward winning this office, or I'm working toward passing this bill or whatever. But it's actually only a handful of times that I can point back and say, I know I made a meaningful difference in this. Whereas now, you know, I stopped, I got help, which felt like a very selfish thing to do at the time. But in retrospect, by going to therapy and by, you know, figuring out what I really wanted in life, you know, now I have this job where I get to help people come home every day at Veterans Community Project. I've gotten to do the work that we talked about earlier with Afghan Rescue Project. And I'm a much better husband and father.
Yeah.
And so, like, I realized that not seeking that title has made me so much more consequential in the lives of others, which isn't to say nobody should run for office, but it is to say, like, especially in this world we live in now where you don't need an office, you just need a platform.
You know, yeah. And, you know, I remember, I'll never forget. So we did our first term together. And in 2010, I ran for state senate and I lost. I ain't lose by much.
No, not much. You should have won.
One could say I should have won.
Yeah, you were objectively the far better candidate.
Hey, you're a good man. But I remember, so we have this veto session after the primaries, right? And I remember being in that veto session in September of 2010. And I was kind of lingering, right? Because, you know, you're the retired, whether intentional or unintentional, you have been retired player, right? So I'm trying to savor and soak in these last moments in the People's House in Jefferson City. And I remember sitting at the back. By the way, we were literally backbenchers.
Literal backbenchers.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember sitting at the back of the lower chamber, the People's House, and you and Stephen Weber, I do not believe it was coincidence. You were kind enough to sit with me and soak in these last few moments as I'm experiencing this career transition at age 30 and all the uncertainty that comes with that. And I remember being choked up and looking at the ceiling so I tears wouldn't come down in front of you guys. And I'm looking at the ceiling and you were like, hey man, it's just a good looking building, man. There's lots of important shit to do. But this is just a decent job in a cool building. You know what I mean? With stained glass windows and historical portraits around. But really, it's just a cool looking building.
Yep.
But there's lots of important shit to do outside of this building. You know, this dome and this ornate historic building. And that made me feel so much better about the scope of all of not only the important things, but the public service that we had in front of us. And we are 15 years beyond that. And I have to imagine that your contributions to humanity have been much greater since that day. And perhaps mine have been too.
For sure.
But you have done more important things since then. But you seem to, even if you didn't quite practice it yourself, you understood it 15 years ago in 2010 when we left. Yeah. Because you told me.
It was easier for me to preach it than to follow it, probably.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was in there. I
have a picture of that moment.
You do?
You know, we've gone through so many iPhone iterations.
Yeah,
I gotta dig
find
it up
and send that to me. I would like to have that.
Yeah.
You know, it worries me. On the flip side of that, it worries me that talented, again, we're going to sound old, talented young people are now aggressively not choosing a political route. I don't blame them. It's much worse than it ever was. But at the same time, like, the thing where people constantly are asking me, you know, well, why aren't you running and all that? What I've had a lot of different versions of how to answer the question because it's been a few years now. And I think what I've settled on is just, well, if we get to a point in time where I think I can make a greater difference by being in a certain office. And this is important, it's the thing I wouldn't have said in the past because I've a little wisdom with age. And I think I'm truly the only person that could do the job.
Yeah.
Which I used to fully believe. And now I'm like, look, probably some other people could do it
right,
as well as me.
Right.
Then I'll probably run. Now, granted, it'll be like my kids are grown, stuff like that. But the reason I never say like that I'll never run for president is not because I'm trying to preserve the opportunity for later. I feel like if I want to preserve the opportunity, it'll be there because, look, there's really no rules. Anybody can run anymore. It's more because, like, the greatest difference I've made since those times is modeling, post-traumatic growth and going out and, like, saying, sometimes you got to stop and take care of yourself. And so now I recognize that, yes, I exist as this former politician and to the extent people think about me. But the other way is the post-traumatic growth guy. Yeah. And so I think it's really important that I say, yeah, I think I could be president. Maybe I'll run for it one day. I think I could still do a good job because people hear me say that and they are people who are hiring people who might have trauma. Yeah. And I want them to hear me say, yeah, I could do that job. So that when they're hiring somebody for a middle manager position and they know like they're a combat veteran or they're somebody who had a bad accident or whatever, that they're not like, I don't know if they're up for it. Like that to me is the reason. And that's the impact I can make now. But it's like, yeah, to your point, trappings are very seductive. Yeah. Really nice ceilings can really make you think shit is really meaningful. Oh my God, yeah. I remember you explained to me, you pointed at the mural that was just beyond the press gallery, like where the press would sit. Yep. And you had a really awesome thing you would say about it. You were like, at night when it gets dark in here, all those people are black. Yeah. It's true. It's true. Yeah. And I remember thinking how cool that was. But it goes to the point of, I promise you, the people who made that building did not intend that.
They did not.
And which is a cool point in and of itself, but it also goes to the point of like, they're just trying to church up some politics that was happening in that building.
That's right. That's right. Well, listen, I'll tell you what else they did not intend. The son of Negro immigrants from Alabama being great friends and brothers with the son of Jewish immigrants who ended up in Kansas City, married to Ukrainian immigrant from Ukraine, who was somehow, some way able to make an impact in their home state and beyond, man. Listen, Harry Truman, I believe, the only president from our beloved old country, from Missouri, said that if you want to find a friend in politics, you should
get a dog.
Get a dog. Well, listen, man. And maybe that is true of Washington, D.C., but I have been extraordinarily blessed that I found you before we got to D.C., man. And
that's right.
Listen, you have been my great friend and my dear brother for a long time, man. And so I appreciate you coming on the caucus room, man, and trying to give folks a little bit of this game. And thank you for all you've done for me.
This was so fun.
My brother, God bless, man. Cheers to you and your ongoing success and health, man. God bless, brother. Thank you for all you've done for me, man.
Thanks, Don.
This is Jason Kander. I'm Don Calloway. This is the Caucus Room. God bless. See y'all soon. Peace.